So I want to welcome the three of you to the show. We've got Glenn Lyons, Nina Trasoff, C.T. Revere. Our conversation today is going to be a lot about some of the transitional time we had in Tucson from pretty much before 2010. A lot of things happening in that timeline. C.T., you kind of brought us all together. How do we all know each other?
Okay, thanks, Tom. Well, I was a newspaper reporter here in Tucson for the last 10 of the last 12 years the Tucson Citizen was publishing, and I knew Nina through that, and she ran some political campaigns, and I got to know her. And one day she asked me if I would come into her office, and I figured I was a columnist at that time. I figured she wanted to talk to me about a column, but instead she asked me, "Have you ever thought about doing anything different?" And I was like, "Sure, I just don't know what." And she invited me to come and be her chief aide, and it took me about 48 hours to say yes, and it was a great decision. And so Nina was 1 year into her term when I joined her staff, and then Glenn Lyons, when once we were a couple years into the term, the Downtown Tucson Alliance was pretty specifically a clean and safe operation, and we knew that we needed somebody who knew how to do some economic development work, and we met Glenn through the folks who ran the Royal Elizabeth on Scott Avenue. They introduced Glenn to us, and we all talked and agreed and brought him down here to run the newly renamed Downtown Tucson Partnership.
Fantastic. Yep. Well, so Nina, you were prior to running for city council, you had a pretty established career here on air. What on earth led you to decide I wanted to be in city council at the time?
Well, I had left the air a few years before that. Uh-huh. I was at KGUN as a reporter and an anchor for 9 years. And then I moved over to University Medical Center, and I did their news communications for 2.5 years.
Okay.
And that was exciting and wonderful and exhausting. And I started my own consulting business. And I was quite content with that. And somebody said, "Did you ever think?" And I hadn't. And it sounded intriguing as one more thing to try in my life. And I really wanted to make a difference. I mean, I came to Tucson in 1976 for the job at KGUN with the intention of getting out as fast as I could and getting back to Los Angeles where I lived.
Okay. And
I fell in love with Tucson. I fell in love with starting the mountains and the beautiful clean air because it was smog in Tucson and in LA at that time. And then with the man who became my husband for 45 years before I lost him. And this is where we wanted to raise our kids. And I felt it was incumbent on me to try and make a difference if I had the skills to do it, to at least put my name out there and try it. And it was a heck of a ride.
That I can understand that. And it's interesting that you chose to stay because at that time, a lot of people were graduating from the U of A, and the joke was we're going to hold the graduation at the airport because people were leaving. But the fact that you stayed and fell in love with Tucson, that's fantastic.
Well, I'd also lived life in my 20s. I had a completely different life, which is not relevant to this, but it was just that I had done so many things, and I came here and started at age 30, and I was at that time in my life that I wanted a home. And boy, is this a great home.
Yeah, fantastic. And Glenn, you'd come, I remember, was it from Calgary?
That's right.
Yeah, you'd come here and done some economic development in other areas as well?
Yeah, I had been working in Calgary for better part of 30 years. Downtown city planner. I built public works projects for the Olympics. Then I ran the local downtown partnership, a lot of economic development work there. Very different style, very different city. And I was looking for a change. I have American citizenship. I grew up in Detroit. And I started looking around for cities in the States that could use my assistance. And my wife and I came down to Tucson just for a long weekend. We stayed at the Royal Liz. Jeff DeGregorio was a city planner, born in Tucson. And we connected, and he suggested that I go meet some people. And the next thing you know, I'm starting to run what became the Downtown Tucson Partnership. And it was an entirely different place to work and a very different ride. I mean, in Calgary, with the oil economy, it's much like Houston. We had our ups and downs. I've been through boom and bust a lot, but no one had seen a bust like we had in 2008. And so that was my starting point.
That's interesting. I'm learning something here. Be careful when you make recommendations, because all three of you got this sort of whisper of something you never thought you were going to be doing,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
and ended up together here. So thanks for those that gave you that little encouragement. And I remember, Glenn, reading in a little bit of preparation for this year, your comment talking about where Tucson could be, and there were a lot of different thoughts on economic development, and people were bringing up cities that might have had a kind of like you were talking about in your area, they might have had a different economic base or something where they could really build on businesses or different opportunities economically. And your quote was, "We have to brand downtown much more as an arts, history, and culture destination."
Yeah. Actually, as I was leaving in 2010, I wrote a strategic plan for downtown called Building the New Pueblo. We call downtown the Old Pueblo. But you have to put new life into your history or it declines too. And so it was a matter of trying to make downtown a better, more contemporary place where more people would want to come, work, live, play, and the like, without losing the charm of old Tucson.
Yeah.
And the recession made it difficult for us to do anything, but that's the time when you start to put the pieces in place. And Rio Nuevo had given us a blueprint, if you like. And so we had to find ways to start with no private investment during the crash and very little government money because the Rio Nuevo bonds hadn't been sold yet.
Yeah, I think if just from a listening perspective, if you don't remember, 2005 and 6, we had this sort of real estate boom, and then 2008 it came crashing down, and nationally, I remember listening to the Treasury Secretary on a Friday saying, if we don't pass a stimulus bill, we might not have an economy on Monday.
Yeah.
And that was a challenging time nationally. And then also Tucson at that time was going through somewhat of an identity crisis, trying to figure out who we wanted to be when we grew up. Yeah.
And to jump off of what Glenn was saying, the new Pueblo versus the old Pueblo, I wanted to be sure that we learned the lessons of the past. And as we moved forward to create the new Pueblo, that we respected the old Pueblo, something that hadn't been done during the downtown revitalization that gave us the convention center and destroyed the barrio, just completely destroyed the barrio and a whole community and way of life that was so rich. And I wanted to make sure that as we moved forward, we respected that and used that as our foundation and built from that rather than wiping that out and let's start over.
Amen. Amen. And I would have to think that you're somewhat pleased at how we're honoring, even though we can't go back and replace the barrio, but we're honoring them in different ways and trying to make sure we understand now where we came from.
Yes. And with the arts organizations, I mean, Glenn was talking about how important that is. That was important to me. My background is I used to be a professional dancer. I mean, the arts were the arts were my life in New York and in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So that's how I was raised. That's who I was. And I wanted that to be an essential part of what set us apart. And we have so many outstanding, for a city our size, to have a ballet, a theater company, a symphony, the museums. It's extraordinary. The quality of those things.
Absolutely. We've talked to many people within those groups, and the level of recognition Tucson gets and the type of talent they attract just continues to grow. Because a lot of people are surprised that in Tucson, and yet we do have quite the talent pool to reach into.
The Friends of Chamber Music here is an incredible resource. I think they've commissioned more new works than anyone else in North America.
Yeah, we had them on the show probably a couple of years ago, and they were focusing on Ukrainian composers at the time, trying to and they brought someone local that had a Ukrainian background that had just created a new piece, and they were broadcasting that out to the world and finding, again, just to me, like, it's just amazing that you can just create something like that and bring it out to the world. I don't know. I just assumed classical music is always out there. Not that it's ever new, but so
it's also the university. I'm sorry, you're talking about the university as part of all of this, and it is such a training ground. The arts department there. I mean, I serve on the dance board. I have for many years, and the quality of the program is ranked in the top 5 in the nation. Here in Tucson. And a lot of these dancers stay, and a lot of them go on to New York, and a lot of them go on to Los Angeles and Vegas, but to major companies. But we have an outstanding dance department and music department and theater department. And then all of the smaller nonprofits in this town. It's a very strong community. And that's what we talked about in building up the downtown, making sure that that was an integral part of our planning process.
Not to get too far off track, but with a lot of the nonprofits and when it comes to the arts, what I'm learning is that it's not just about the artistic side, it's also about the diversity side and bringing the arts to demographics that might not normally have that exposure and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate. That's not just downtown. I think that's Tucson in general, but that does sort of stem from that same feeling.
Well, and that's particularly the case with the Latino community because there's a rich cultural heritage here and many generations of Mexican Americans living in Tucson. And if you're not careful, you miss it, particularly if you're a snowbird coming in for the winter. And so to the extent that as you develop your downtown and you build up your events and your institutions, you need to make sure that you haven't forgotten about those roots because they're critical to the image of the city.
I'd like to, with that in mind, go back to the discussion about the barrios as being such an important part of our heritage in Tucson. While it's certainly regrettable and worth remembering what happened to some of the barrios with the TCC and everything, which really started with I-10 dividing downtown back in the 60s. But the barrios that we have now, as you know, because you lived in one of them, as do I, they are celebrated globally. I mean, the recognition that those neighborhoods are getting from publications and broadcasts and just just the attention is really, really rewarding.
And big publications like New York Times and Time Magazine.
Traveler, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, the New York Times, it seems like they have somebody out here about every month or two.
Great.
Not in the summer.
No, not in the summer. They're smarter than that, yeah.
So we have a lot of really good plans. We have a tough economic climate in which to operate. I mean, from like an actionable standpoint, I mean, how do you go about getting some of these things through when you don't have any money and you've got really good ideas, but you're making a transformative effort?
Well, if I may, when I, and this predates Glenn's arrival, when it was, this was about 2007 when I joined Nina's staff. And all I had ever been was a reporter. And of course, reporters, we all think we know everything, but then you get involved in government and you see how things work and you realize how really complex it is. And one of the most common phone calls that I received, because one of the areas that I was responsible for Nina's direction was land use and development services. So I was getting phone calls on a very regular basis from people who had found a property in Tucson that was their dream spot for starting the business that they wanted to start. And they were well invested in it. And all of a sudden they're finding obstacles in the way that had much to do with things like parking requirements based on the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. When a building is built for one thing, and probably when a lot of them were built, there wasn't a lot of thought to the regulatory environment. So, but then there was an expectation. If you had a business that was once a bakery that had a half a dozen employees, but then it was turned into a restaurant or a print shop or whatever, it changes the need for people to leave their cars when they come to work or when they show up to be a customer, and it was most of the time it was more onerous than the original requirement, and it just wasn't tenable. You can't create new parking in buildings that exist because the land is what it is. So I was hearing from these folks on a regular basis, and I felt for them. We need small businesses to succeed, and we wanted people to succeed in Tucson. So I went to a fellow named Jesse Sanders, who was the deputy director of the Development Services Department, and I said, Jesse, I'm getting these phone calls. What can we do? And he smiled and said, I have been waiting for a council aide to ask me this question for a long time. And he explained to me how there were a lot of discussions in the meeting rooms at City Hall and in Development Services about the land use code and how the certificate of occupancy feeds the land use code and how the certificate of occupancy is required to get a business license. And I said, well, it's good that we're talking about it in closed doors, but let's put it in front of people, because that's how you make things happen. And so we put together a stakeholder group that was really largely a function of the Small Business Commission that the city had. And we started working with them to find ways to to narrow down the requirements, especially for the downtown area, because it was so important that you not have this onerous parking requirement for people to open a business. And and that was a tough process, in part because a lot of the business operators that were part of this stakeholder group had been operating businesses for a long time, and for one reason or another, they were never required to get a C of O in order to get their business license. So while we're trying to make a process easier for them, they're seeing a process that was never there before. And it became a very, very difficult, public process to get through. But ultimately what we did is we created the less onerous requirements, really trying to focus specifically on health and safety issues. And the 5 Points Market was our test place.
Okay.
The folks who own that now were looking to start a market, the Ethiopian restaurant, and a coffee roasting business. And under the old, parking codes, they would have had to have, a fields of parking for all that stuff. But of course, it's not there because they're at the junction of 5 historic neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So we used that, and obviously you can see how well that worked because it's a very popular spot. We had brunch there the other day, and so anyway, that's kind of the role that I played early on, and based on that, Nina had a different aide at the time who was working on downtown redevelopment, and because these two things were so linked, she asked me if I would take over being her point person on downtown development.
And we had to take all of these things into. He's talking about one really critically important aspect of that, but then we had to look at how do we tie all of this together. I mean, that was an essential part of it, but so was getting people here, and so was the focus on it being a downtown. And what did that mean? How far east did that go? How far west did that go? Then came the streetcar concept, which was really rough. And it was, I guess my role in all of that was looking at all of these individual aspects and figure out how do we tie this together with the ribbon, and how do we get it passed through my colleagues and get community support.
Yeah, and well, in your Ward 6, so just to be clear, it's not downtown. I mean, Ward 6 is...
Oh, yeah, no, Ward 6 was downtown.
No, but it wasn't just downtown.
Oh, right,
yeah,
no.
Yeah.
Oh, no, my other pet project, which just to throw out there, was the zoo.
Oh, yeah.
And saving the elephants at the zoo. And that was another battle that I was doing at the same time that I was working with these guys.
So it's not like you can put all of your energies into this one focus. You've got
when you're on council, respect the council members. Yeah. They're dealing with your issue and this and this and this and that.
And then also looking at a way that makes sense, because as Ward 6 goes and you're into 4th Avenue and you're into the university, you've got other, so have some of the historical issues, but you've got the density issues, the parking issues, the business issues.
But you also have the development issues in that it was easy. It would have been easy to just focus on the greater downtown area. Mm-hmm. But we just felt that it needed to also include the university area. Right. How do you tie the university in to the downtown? And then you've got the barrios, what's left of them. And then you have the west side, which is in such need of revitalization. And Regina Romero and I, our current mayor, she represented the west side, Ward 1. And we went between working closely together to battling and then finding the way to work closely together, and ended up as a great partner the battle was the streetcar. Had to go from the university through downtown, but when do we build the west side of it?
Right.
And she said, now. And I said, no, we need to get that. And so we ended up with a compromise of most of the economic development would be focused downtown, because that's where the money would come from. But the streetcar would be part of the initial plan, so that the west side could be drawn into it. And you've seen the wonderful stuff that's being done west of the freeway.
Yeah, and I've talked to the developers that that would not have happened if the streetcar hadn't been extended over there.
The streetcar, when that came in, Raul Grijalva was on board right away.
Yep.
Gabby was newer and wanted to understand it better. And so I visited her with her in D.C. and brought her a video that Saf and I worked on that showed along the route planned and used statistics and demonstrations that, for every mile of streetcar, X millions of dollars of development would happen. And boy, you go along that streetcar and it played out in spades. I mean, it's way more than was anticipated. And she was on board immediately.
Yeah, there's no coincidence that my show is called Life Along the Streetcar, because I came to Tucson in 1993. I didn't get involved with really understanding our history and culture until 2015. And by that point, the streetcar had been operational, and I could clearly see in my comments and interviews and talking to people that connection was really what drove a lot of the economic development. And had
Absolutely.
we not fought for that back in the early days and gotten the Tiger Grant and been able to really pursue that.
Right, but boy, was it painful getting there. When we were in office, they were working on the Tiger Grant, and they were working on, sort of determining what kind of streetcar we wanted, visiting Portland and other places where we could see examples of what was happening. But in the meantime, the first thing that had to happen was any utilities that were under that proposed streetcar line had to move. Mm-hmm. And so because you can't have gas lines and water lines under a train track, otherwise you're tearing up the train track when something happens. So the first thing we did was construction that, from people's perspective, didn't have any benefit, but it sure hurt them financially.
Yeah.
And it really made it tough. I mean, we recognized and appreciated how hard it was for people who were doing business there, but it had to be done in order to get to where we are now. And that, we did, as the aides, we did constituent services, and we got beat up a lot. Mm. It was challenging.
It's tough to get from where you are to where you want to go sometimes, and that challenge can be something difficult to overcome.
I think one of the things that was powerful in those days, because, we were mostly Democrats, but at the time, Bob Walkup was the mayor. And we worked together so beautifully because it wasn't a political issue, or shouldn't be. And it wasn't. It was, how do we look at it from all points of view and work together? And he and I were a tag team when it came to Washington and to some of the internal and regional politics. He was fabulous at that particular time. And then the relationships that you built. East Side was a different issue because they weren't really tied to downtown. And yet they were able to see the value and realize that there were things that were worth coming down here for as we developed them.
Yeah. One of the first major visible initiatives of downtown redevelopment was the Streetscape project on Scott Avenue. And that was very strategic because the folks out on the east side who didn't find reason to go downtown, didn't believe that it was worth the investment or the tax, the capturing the taxes that the TIF district allowed. So what the city did was they made the street where the theater is located into a really wonderful place where you're not tripping over uneven sidewalks and everything else, because the customer base, the people who go to the theater, come from the east side. So it introduced them to the benefit of this effort. And it was really, it caused some controversy at the time, but it was really a smart move on the city's part to do that.
That was the first project that I really got involved in from a design point of view. And I had taken one of the first pedestrian malls in Canada that had failed, full pedestrian in Calgary. And we converted it back to traffic in the evenings to create an entertainment district. And we did it on a historic theme. And so I was asked to help out in that design process. Fran Lasala was leading it, and there was a really good consulting team working on it. And I didn't understand a lot about the history beyond what I could see. I didn't understand what water harvesting was. I did understand the need. That was readily apparent. But we kind of rolled up our sleeves and we worked together, and we realized that we had to create a destination where you could walk from one end of from Broadway to the end of the 4-block area, turn around, come back, and you understood the story of Tucson. And then if you were doing it because you were walking to the theater, you understood something about its future too. And boy, did those consultants do a good job. Yeah. And the construction of it and the way it's been maintained is great. I've worked on many pedestrian mall type projects like that, where city governments have been so tight with the money. When we were finished, we asked ourselves whether it was worth doing or not. You don't ask that question with this one.
No, it's my favorite section of any street in Tucson, and Of course, my favorite part is Toby the Griffin, because you can see the footprints from where he jumped off the building.
That was so clever.
Yeah.
I fell in love with that.
And that was so Tucson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, what all that you're mentioning is it's arts and entertainment and restaurants. I mean, we have an amazing. I mean, we're a city of gastronomy.
Yep.
Hello, Tucson.
Yes.
And we're one of the first.
We were
But
the first in the United States.
Were we?
Very
That's
first.
right. I'd forgotten.
We tied with a city in Mexico for first in North America, but we were first in the United States.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, I remember when an astronomer would come to talk, they'd fill the big hall at the university. 2,000 people would come to listen to an astronomer. And I was like, what planet am I on? This never happens.
But going back to the gastronomy, kudos to Janos,
Yes.
who helped get all of that going. And he and I were talking the other day. He told me something a few years ago, and I wanted to make sure it was right before we talked, that, he had been up on the north side at one of the resorts, and he moved his restaurant downtown, which was humongous at that time. He said the reason he did that was because of the portal we created, the entry by redoing the 4th Avenue underpass. And that's what opened the gates for him to come down and started all of this with amazing restaurants we have downtown, dozens of them. Okay, here's an anecdote from when I first came in office, and I was such a naive. I mean, I'd been a reporter, I'd covered things, I knew what was going on. I had no concept of what it was like to be that person and do it. And a few weeks into my term, a developer came and spoke to me about the plans for the 4th Avenue underpass, which predates you. You might not know this. The original plans were to leave the old 4th Avenue underpass, which was just claustrophobic, and then build a new one underneath for the streetcar and traffic, and that would become a pedestrian way. The result would have been if you've envisioned that area, the entire downtown entry to downtown would have been asphalt and concrete, underpasses and roadways. And this guy came to me and said, no, we need to get rid of the 4th Avenue underpass and maintain that the 6th Avenue will be a historic one and never be touched.
Right.
And make that commitment to history. And then we need to create an entryway, a wide, broad, pedestrian-friendly, streetcar-friendly entryway. And I remember I'd been in office maybe a month. 2 weeks in, I'd met with this guy and thought it was kind of intriguing. And I called our then transportation director, Jim Glock, bless his heart, who came into my office. I said, Jim, somebody's presented me with some ideas that I think are really good for the 4th Avenue underpass. And he literally could not stop from rolling his eyes and said, we've been working on this for 5 years. We've gone through so many iterations and this and that. We finally have a plan. And you want, this he's saying to the new council member, he couldn't help himself. Then he looked at the plans. He said, this is good. And became a partner in it and helped create that. But that was the entryway, and I think that's a lot of the gateway that helped Congress become the stellar thing, the Hotel Congress, which is astounding what they've done, and the revision of the train depot, and all of the stuff downtown. I think that was a key thing, and then next to that was the streetcar.
Yeah, I've talked to many people that would agree with that 4th Avenue underpass was dynamic in so many ways, just not transportation, but it really opened up, it was inviting and it opened up a way for people to cross through. And 4th Avenue and downtown were really kind of separate entities because of that. And now they were just sort of an extension of each other.
In some ways, it kicked off the apartment boom that he had. It started right where the underpass arrives in downtown and really changed the whole sense of downtown living.
Yeah. Well, the two of you, you're still in Tucson. You get to experience some of our Tucson life. But Glenn, you don't live here right now. You get to come back occasionally. Do you have thoughts when you walk around?
Well, every time, we've been coming back every few years since 2010. And every time we come back, there's another piece of the puzzle that's been filled in. And it's never quite the way we thought it would be, but it shines on its own. And as you fill in more pieces of the puzzle, you start to see the picture. And it's a very good picture. This is a really pleasant place to be. And it's still a small downtown. It's still a downtown that is welcoming and maintains its charm. So that's really what we see.
And I think it's still based upon those principles that you put forth, the art, the history, the culture. That's what's driving a lot of this. Do have more people, businesses, and people living, but it's all being driven by those three components of art, history, and culture.
Yeah, and I think part of it, too, is that we don't have 50,000 office workers coming to work and going into the big buildings downtown. We have to build our economy around other things. And as much as we'd like to have an office boom here, it has given us room to do more things downtown.
Yeah. And Nina, you're with the university, is that correct?
Oh, no,
you're no longer.
I'm trying desperately to be retired.
Okay, how's that working out?
Not real well. What's happening is I'm still working for groups, mostly nonprofits, that I love, and instead of charging them, I just am doing it. So, but
it's a very expensive hobby.
Well, but I'm at that time of life,
Yeah.
and I enjoy that. I enjoy still being able to make contributions, being part of several boards of directors, and just helping to move things along in the city. So it's nice to still be involved and play a role.
And I would just have to imagine that you just feel like you just have to have this like a warm glow as you walk around and just see how things have come together.
I think my 2 points of pride, if I allow myself that, are what's happened downtown and knowing what it was, where it was going, and how, as a team, we managed to shift things, and that I could play a role in that, a leadership role in that. And the other one are the elephants at the zoo. When Nandi was born, the first of the elephant breeding program that they have going on, it was because of the excellence and the losing 2 soccer fields in order to create enough space for the elephants to meet national, international standards. And now we have one of the preeminent breeding programs in the nation,
I didn't
in
know
the
that.
world, actually. Oh, yeah. And Nandi was the firstborn of that, so I figure that's the only granddaughter I have. I have 2 sons and 5 grandsons, so Nandi is my granddaughter. 4-legged and rather large, but no, it's
but
a
love her
big point
nonetheless.
of pride. So it's a
thank
very
you.
nice feeling.
Thank you. And CT, you're downtown quite a bit.
I am. I lived downtown. About 10 years ago, I moved downtown. And I did it in large part because I was seeing the fruits of the work that we did. We took a lot of grief while we were getting it done because, as Bob Walkup would like to say all the time, I would rather be at the ribbon cutting than the groundbreaking. And I see that clearly now. You're celebrating at the ribbon cutting. At the groundbreaking, you're basically causing inconvenience and construction and discomfort. But I moved to Armory Park about 10 years ago, and I'm never moving out of there. My wife and I bought a home downtown, a 1900 railroad house. And it's really rewarding to be down here. And after we left office, Nina instilled in me a love for public service. And so that's what I've done for the last 18 years after a lifetime of newspapering. So I went to work for the Arizona Department of Transportation, and I did community relations work and public involvement, basically, ensuring that the requirements of NEPA were met when we're doing highway projects and road projects, so that we don't have the same disastrous results for people who are, the least powerful people among us, like we did back in the 50s and 60s. So I got to be involved in a lot of things that way, and then I was a consultant for a while, and now I work in the legal services building. So, yeah.
Well, CT, thank you. Nina, thank you. Glenn, thank you. As someone who really began to appreciate Tucson in 2015, I know that the work that the three of you put forth and the effort and the turmoil that you might have gone through was worth it for me. So that's all that really matters. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
A pleasure.